Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Kalamata, Greece. And we are pleased to be joined once again by our comrade Laith Marouf, geopolitical analyst extraordinaire based in Beirut. Um, I don't say this often enough, but, I always look forward to these discussions with Laith for two reasons. First of all, Laith is, from my perspective, a quintessential resistance journalist, which is to say, he puts himself on the line in so many ways, not just physically, he certainly does that, but in so many ways to tell the story of the victims of the brutal Anglo American Empire. But also, he has a perspective on geopolitics that is always original. Every time I speak to you, Laith, I hear an analysis, and it's not necessarily the case that I'll immediately agree with it, but I hear an analysis that I hadn't heard before. And it always strikes me as quite insightful and thought provoking. So we're always pleased to have Laith on the program, and thanks for joining us again today.
Well, thank you for all those words, Dimitri. I'm always glad to speak to you. You're also definitely one of a kind in the Anglo-speaking mediascape. Again, not only because you have such a wide variety of knowledge around the world, but because, again, you go to places and in the age of all these Zoom media celebrities that we have, you're number one, a breath of fresh air, and in a category separate than all those new celebrities that we see.
Thank you so much, brother. Very much appreciated. So, Laith, I want to start our conversation today by focusing on Iran. And before I ask you for your perspective on what's happening in these negotiations, I wanted to share with our audience some information which I don't think gets shared often enough when people talk about Iran's nuclear program. As I was preparing for this interview, I thought to myself, I never see in any of the reports that I have read about Iran's nuclear program over the years any explanation for why Iran might want to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. This is a technical question, and I'm certainly no expert, but I think I've gotten at least a sense by doing some research about this, and I'd like to share that before we get into this negotiation that's going on. So I'm going to pull up an image, a chart compiled by the Nuclear Threat Initiative of the World Nuclear Association. You just bear with me here. Now, as I understand it, the purpose of enrichment is to increase the concentration of U-235 atoms. And this is done by removing U-238 atoms. And you'll see on the left in the middle of the screen, it says natural uranium contains 0.7% of U-235. It's very important to understand, as I grasp this information, and if anybody in our audience thinks I'm getting this wrong, please, leave that in the comment. We'll correct it later. But in order to get to the level of enrichment necessary just for commercial nuclear power plants, you have to get to 5% or thereabouts of U-235. Then, if you want to get to sufficient enrichment for nuclear research reactors, you have to get to 20% of U-235. And if you want to get to weapons grade, that's 90% of U-235 concentration. And this is very important. The JCPOA, the Obama-era nuclear deal with Iran, the one that Trump trashed and is now trying to replace with something which supposedly would be more severe if Iran were to agree to it, it capped Iran's enrichment at 3.67%. So I'm not sufficiently versed in this, Laith, to know whether that's quite high enough for commercial nuclear power plants, but the chart indicates that the necessary level is 5%. So that was a very strict requirement to impose upon Iran. But the main point I want to make here is that according to the World Nuclear Association, you have to engage in some level of enrichment just to be able to operate commercial nuclear power plants. And then somebody may say, well, Iran's got so much oil, what does it need nuclear power? But you could make the same argument about other countries that have nuclear power. I mean, Russia has oceans of oil. The United States is a major, producer of oil, and yet they have nuclear energy, commercial nuclear energy. So that's really not, in my view, a convincing criticism of Iran's nuclear program. In any event, with that as background, Laith, the Trump administration, it seems to me, has been giving some mixed signals about what it wants from its nuclear discussions with Iran. 1 week ago, Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who's leading the negotiation, suggested in an interview with Fox News that Iran would be allowed to continue enriching uranium. The question, of course, would be to what level. But on the following day, Witkoff posted on X, quote, any final arrangement must set a framework for peace, stability, and prosperity in the Middle East, meaning that Iran must stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment and weaponization program. So, Laith, what is going on here? Do you think the Trump administration has clear and consistent goals for these negotiations? And if so, what do you think its actual goals are?
Well, look, the goals of the United States in negotiations with Iran really didn't change ever, because the strategic goal of the United States in specifically the region of Western Asia is to maintain the supremacy of the Zionist colony against anyone in the region, and to maintain control of the oil fields in Western Asia, and if possible, recapture the only oil fields in Western Asia that are not under control of the United States, which are those of Iran, that the US and the UK lost with the Islamic Revolution in 1979. So once we analyze from understanding what's the strategic goal of the United States there, then everything falls in place and it's easier to see clearly. So what the United States want to do to achieve this goal? It has only one possible outcome, which is to weaken the Iranian state to a point where it ceases to be a threat to the continuation of the existence of the Jewish supremacist colony and the United States control of the oil fields in Western Asia. That's, whether it's Trump or Biden or anybody, that's what they're going to try to do. They're not there to share these resources or allow the Arabic people to benefit from their own resources. And therefore, they will try to pressure Iran into that positionality, either through negotiated surrender into the hegemony of the United States and or a military enforcement of this hegemony. The United States, of course, has a very small window of operation in attempting to force Iran into its hegemony, and that is, anything below full war, like assassinations of the president, for instance, or assassinations of scientists, assassinations of generals, terrorist attacks that are on the ground in Iran, and or cyber terrorist attacks that disable. Because if the United States actually goes in a direct war with Iran, then the cost of attempting to force Iran into submission will be so high, because all of the oil fields and the American bases in the region will be up in flames, and the economy of the globe will be shattered, and all transportation of goods in the major waterways here between Asia, Africa, and Europe will be disrupted. So what I don't know how much can the Americans do without going to full war. They've already tried doing those things for 20 years now.
Yeah, we know that Israel hates Iran's ballistic conventional missile capability uh, because it is a serious weapon, a serious threat. So too does the United States, of course, with all of those sitting duck military assets in West Asia that the United States has. And of course, they are infuriated that anybody would provide assistance to the resistance groups in Yemen and Palestine and Lebanon and elsewhere. Um, I'm having great difficulty understanding, Laith, how this doesn't end up in a war, because I just don't think they're going to be, despite the enormous, enormous costs and risks of a direct war with Iran. I'm having great difficulty believing that Trump and Netanyahu are ultimately going to be satisfied with some version of a nuclear deal with Iran that's slightly more strict than the JCPOA, or possibly not even more strict, more or less the same beast. And of course, Netanyahu has long coveted a war with Iran, and the inclination of Donald Trump has been to, give Israel what it wants. Not that I believe Israel controls the Trump administration. I don't buy that at all. But they've tended to see eye to eye so many times. So, do you think that Iran might be willing to concede enough to keep the dogs of war at bay?
Yeah, I think Iran is going to try to stretch these negotiations as long as possible because, the United States is a empire in decline, and it has a lot of competition with other major powers like China and Russia, and its control of other regions of the world is waning. And the United States, as a empire in decline, needs to rejuvenate a new generation, and part of that will be having to expand the borders of this empire and return to the violent old ways of colonialism, just to kind of remasculinize the population and create a new arc for the imperial life. And the Iran obviously provides and Yemen, as we see right now, provides one of the targets that are below the nuclear holocaust threshold for the United States to reassert its dominance, to make an example of somebody on this planet so the others fall in line, and or China and Russia bring down their ceilings of their objectives on an international scale. So so Iran will have to stretch this as far as possible to see what will be the effect of the um, tariffs war that Trump just started with the whole planet on the American economy, on the United States' ability to project its power or move its military and or find the resources to arm itself and so forth. Uh, Iran is not in a rush to find right now an agreement with the United States, and the United States actually would not want to. I'm sure Trump, although he would want to do anything that Netanyahu wants, there is, of course, the possibility of the United States losing more than it can ever gain by starting a war on Iran. So I think Trump is going to take his time also. He's not in a rush, and he's trying, as we can see, find other ways to reassert the barbarity on the international scale of the United States. Look at what he's doing right now with the El Salvador concentration camps and the mass deportations that are happening. We can think about what could happen on the Mexican or Canadian or on Greenland's territory if the United States, if Trump doesn't think that a war with Iran will pay off, he will be trying to find a weaker opponent immediately.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. I think the best course of action for Iran is to drag this out as long as possible. given the current trajectory of the United States economy and its various bumbling and fumbling and stumbling on the world stage. It's quite a show. Um, an interesting aspect of all of this, Laith, when we talk about what Iran is willing to give and so forth, up in the northern part of the woods in Ukraine, we've watched over the course of the war there. There's been this kind of, it's kind of cliche to say it, but I think it is the best metaphor, this good cop, bad cop routine between Vladimir Putin on the one hand, who, despite everything that's said about him in the Western media, does actually project as the voice of reason and restraint when he speaks on behalf of the Russian Federation. And then you have the former president, Dimitri Medvedev, who's been very, very sharp-tongued during the course of this war and oftentimes outright crude. And it's not a perfect comparison, but do you think that there's something like that going on in the case of Iran, where Khamenei is posing to some degree as the hardliner and Pezeshkian as the voice of reason? And one of the psychological impacts of this, if I'm correct in my interpretation, is that because Khamenei is perceived to be hostile to negotiations, when the Iranians actually sit down and talk to the Americans, they feel like they're getting a concession from Iran. They feel like they've managed to coerce something out of Iran that Iran didn't want to give. But in fact, all Iran is doing is stretching out this negotiation. And, oftentimes when I was doing class actions, we often talk, you want to get to yes, when the parties are far apart, you got to keep the conversation going. Just keep it going. Don't allow the conversation to stop. Eventually, you'll get to a place you want to be. Do you think that there's some of that going on, or do you think there's genuine hostility on the part of Khamenei to direct negotiations with the Americans?
Yeah, I mean, somebody who's an Iranian nationalist will tell you that there's actually a real fight. But my belief is that the reason that the Iranian government and the Islamic Revolution has been successful is because it learned how to play the theatrics. And just like in the United States, there's no really any difference between the Democrats and the Republicans in terms of the strategic goal of having the United States as a dominant hegemon empire. There is definitely no difference in any of those who are elected in Iran in terms of their belief in the strategic goal of maintaining Iran as a sovereign country. And the rest is theatrics for the internal and the external use. And that's a success. I think this is something that other countries should learn from. You got to play a little bit theatrics. There's no democracy anywhere on this planet. I don't lie to anybody and say I think, let's say, Iran is a democracy. Iran is as much as a democracy as the United States, and that's all you need to. If that's the measure of what democracy is, for sure, Iran is a democracy.
Right. Now, what do you make of this recent visit of I believe it was the Saudi defense minister, a member of the bin Salman family, to Iran, where he met, and there was a cordial photo published of him seated across from the Ayatollah Khomeini. What do you think they were really talking about, Laith? I don't really put much stock in what we were told they were talking about. Interested in your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, like the public statements was that Saudi is trying to have better relations with Iran and have direct military cooperation. And then there was a statement from the Saudi government just as he returned, the minister condemning Israeli war crimes and supporting the Palestinian people. So there's a lot of statement being made clearly for public consumption. Behind the scene, obviously, the Saudis have opened a border war on Yemen with attacks from the Saudi territory on the ground, and of course, the Americans using Saudi airspace and flying from Al Udeid airspace in Qatar to attack Yemen. Those were all happening while the Minister of Defense arrived in Iran, the Saudi minister. So clearly behind the scene, there is discussion about what will happen if the war continues in Yemen and goes in a certain direction. And what will happen in this situation of an attack on Iran? Clearly, the use of the B-2s and the B-52s to bombard the mountains of Yemen are being used as a warning for Iran because of its geography also being mountainous. But as we see, the Iranians and the Yemenis are not phased off, because up until now, American bunker buster bombs haven't been able to penetrate the caches of weapons of Yemen because of the kind of rock that these mountains are made from. And this is similar to the structures of the mountains in Iran. To kind of round it up, I think obviously the Saudis were bringing kind of a carrot and a stick maybe behind the scene. I don't think they spoke in those ways to the Ayatollah, but maybe they spoke to their counterparts in the military of Iran in such ways. And at the same time, I think the Saudis are keeping a path for retreat from all this mess that they are now engaging themselves in Yemen with these public statements.
Mhm. The Ansar Allah has reported that it just shot down yet another U.S. Reaper drone. Apparently, that's 6 U.S. drones destroyed since March 3rd. What is your best sense of the capabilities of Ansar Allah, the military capabilities? Do you see any indication that they have been significantly degraded by this savagery that the United States and its proxies are visiting upon the country?
You know, the first few days of the American bombardment uh, would have, if they were successful, would have had immediate effect on Yemen's targeting of the Zionist colony and of shipping going to the Zionist colony. But as we saw, there was no retreat and or a wind down of these attacks. On the contrary, for instance, today we saw attacks on al-Rashrash, quote unquote, Eilat, the port on the Red Sea, and the Ain al-Saba, Beersheba, sorry, Bir Saba in the desert of Al-Naqab. So the the Yemenis are continuing to bombard the Zionist colony. So after the first few days, when it was clear there is no effect in targeting whatever military targets are on the list of the United States, and that's why we saw the beginning of the United States outright targeting civilian infrastructure with the attacks on Ain Isa or Ras Isa port, that hosts the oil tankers and so forth, bringing gasoline and oil to Yemen, with those tens of martyrs, workers at the port, and then the United States targeting the fire crews and the ambulances that came a few hours later to rescue the people. And then, of course, we saw yesterday the attack on a public market in Sana'a, and these are just a few of the examples of civilians and civilian infrastructure that have been targeted over the last 24, 72 hours by the United States, and that's an indicator that the United States has failed, even going through its whole list of supposed military targets. It has failed to achieve any of its goals, and therefore now it's punishing the Yemeni people by targeting, civilian infrastructure and civilian homes, in hopes that it can force the Yemeni people somehow to pressure their own government to end the support of people in Palestine. And as we saw over the last 17 months, this policy of using genocide and targeting of civilians in order to force the populations, the indigenous populations in the region here, to submit to the will of the Zionists and the Americans hasn't worked. So clearly, all these are acts of desperations by the United States. And at any moment now, Yemen is going to retaliate by targeting the same kind of civilian infrastructure in both the Zionist colony and any country in the region that is aiding the Americans in their attacks on Yemen.
Let's switch to Syria, Laith. The Jerusalem Post earlier this month published an op-ed which was entitled, if you'll just bear with me one moment, Turkey's Military Expansion in Syria, a New Threat to Israel's Security. This was on April 2nd, and the author was Shay Gal, who was apparently he's an expert in strategic communications and national security, and previously served as vice president of external relations at Israel Aerospace Industries, and has advised senior Israeli officials. And around this time, I think it was a few days later, when the war criminal Netanyahu made his most recent visit to the White House, he sat beside Trump in a press conference in which he almost said nothing. I mean, it was all Trump's show, but there was a moment when he made his preliminary remarks when he stressed the importance of the Donald mediating some kind of reduction in tensions between Erdogan and Netanyahu. So he was more or less echoing what's expressed in this op-ed. And I could go on. There are numerous other indications coming out of the Israeli establishment that Erdogan is some kind of new threat. Turkey is some kind of new threat to Israel. What, in fact, is going on right now in Syria, to the best of your judgment, in terms of Turkey's military presence there? And do you think that there's any validity to this threat at all?
Yeah, I don't think there's any threat of confrontation between the Turks and the Israelis. That's all just to make the Arabic and Muslim people that have seen over the last 16, 17 months that none of the Sunni, quote unquote, states in the Muslim world have came to the support of Gaza. And so in the fall of the Syrian government has been a huge blow to the axis of resistance. So they need to continue this propaganda that somehow Erdogan and the Muslim Brotherhood and Qatar also are going to be the saviors of the Arabs and Muslims and the people of Gaza and Palestine. And that's, of course, all a lie. The Turks and the Israelis have an agreement. They're sharing the loot of Syria, all the archaeological sites, all the national resources, all the money that was in the banks, all the gold reserve, everything's gone. And they have not had one bullet fired between each other. And the only threat to the Israelis is the actual growing indigenous resistance on the ground. We saw over the last 24 hours attacks on Israeli positions in the Quneitra area, and the Israelis also shooting on civilians in that same area in the south of Syria. Internally, the country continues to suffer from massacres in the coast. Every day, girls and women from the Alawi, Christian, and Shia population are being kidnapped. You can go on Telegram right now. There's groups that are selling Syrian women that have been enslaved. There's reports and videos of these slave markets in Idlib. And none of the people that for more than a decade talked to us about and campaigned about human rights in Syria and women's rights in Syria and anti-ISIS in Syria are making one sound about what's happening in Syria. It's the numbers of confirmed massacres have surpassed 50 somewhat thousand. and there's at least another 20, 30,000 that are missing, reported missing. There's death threats and an arrest warrant and an award for the capture of Mother Agnes, very famous Syrian nun that has been documenting over the last 2 months the massacres in the coast, and taking pictures and making lists of the names of the missing and the killed. So the situation clearly is in the total, everything that Israel wants is happening. There's nothing that Israel doesn't want in Syria that is not happening. Why would it be worried about Erdogan?
Mm-hmm. And are the attacks continuing across the Lebanese border from Syria?
We've had a quiet moment over the last week and a half in Syria, on this border between Syria and Lebanon. There is rumors that Al-Julani is worried about his stability because there's so many big players on the ground: the Americans, the Turks, the Israelis, and because originally the plan between Turkey and Israel was that he is not going to enter Damascus. It was going to be the Wahhabi death squads in the south of Syria that are under control of the Jordanians and the Israelis that would enter Damascus. But Erdogan pushed Jolani to go, into Damascus, and now, obviously, you have all these, hodgepodge collection of terrorist organizations, looters, pirates, bandits, basically, that have been merged together, and these are, gangs that were fighting each other for territorial control in the old days and have blood feuds. And so it's a cutthroat situation. And Julani is very weak. He needs the support of all these large players that are, kind of having an argument over the loot, let's say. And the worst case scenario is who's going to take more of the oil, who's going to take more of whatever. But at the same time, he needs foreign support from the Saudis, from the Qataris, from the Emiratis, which, again, each one of them have their own territorial goals. So this man is very temporary. He knows he's very temporary. So he's not going to, he's trying to minimize his fights with Lebanon. And as we saw over the last week and a half, it seems like it's calmed down in the corner.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've seen the occasional reports in the Western media of the genocidal entity targeting what are claimed to be Hezbollah figures in the country, particularly in the south of Lebanon, over the last 3 weeks or so since we last spoke. Could you tell us about attacks by the genocidal regime in Lebanon during the month of April?
Yeah, yesterday we were in Al Khiyam, right on the border with occupied Palestine, for a funeral for two Hezbollah members that were assassinated in Al Ghaziya village just south of Saida city, just on 2 days ago before the funeral. And as we were there, the Israeli air jets bombarded the south of Lebanon. Some of the biggest explosions we've seen in a while. Attacks in the central border region, as well as attacks on Al-Tufah, Iqlim Al-Tufah, the apple region north of the Litani. If you remember that restaurant we sat on overlooking the valley, the area that we were looking at from the restaurant is the area that was attacked also yesterday. 2 days ago, we were in Yahmur, and on the way to Yahmur, we witnessed an attack on a civilian car, and also
By drone?
sorry, yes, by a drone.
Was that a drone?
Yes, that was a drone strike, two missiles, and on our way also to Muhaybib in the south, where we recorded the destruction of the tomb of Prophet Benjamin. There was another attack on a motorcycle with a drone, two missiles again. So, we have been kind of unlucky in the last week. Every time we went, these attacks happened very close to us, and we were there within a few minutes from the attacks. You can watch all of that on our YouTube channel, on our X, freepalestine.video is the website, and if people want to donate to help us to continue producing this content, would really appreciate it. So yeah, these attacks.
And has there been?
Sorry, go ahead.
Please. I was going to ask if there's been any change in the posture of the Lebanese National Army in the face of these attacks, or does it continue to be completely passive in the face of these aggressions?
Yeah, they've been completely passive. There was actually an explosion yesterday while we were in the south, also of armaments that the Lebanese military was diffusing, and it led to the death of an officer and 3 soldiers, as well as a civilian woman and her child that were passing in a car near the location. So, we didn't hear any statements from the prime minister or the president condemning the attacks on South Lebanon. We didn't hear even, condemnation of the Israelis, let's say, not giving information about how to disarm these munitions and or their locations to the UNIFIL and the Lebanese army, so they can be careful what they're doing. According to what international law requires them to do, the Israelis are supposed to show where they left all these unexploded armaments. Anyways, and in fact, if the prime minister or the president open their mouth about these things, usually is not that encouraging. So it's almost like better that they don't say anything. We saw the president and the prime minister just before these attacks talk about supposedly disarming Hezbollah and merging it with the Lebanese military, which is a joke, on the model of the PMU, Popular Mobilization Units in Iraq, that are an official part of the Iraqi military. And at the same time, the Prime Minister Salam here in Lebanon, after saying this, that he wants to follow this model, he somehow still called the PMU a armed group that is unlawful armed group. So that led to squabble with the Iraqi government, and Iraq withdrawing its ambassador from Lebanon. And remember, Lebanon is practically living now on Iraqi donated fuel that is running the electricity generators here in the country. And if Iraq decides to stop this free fuel, the country will go dark. So the prime minister and the president are, saying a lot of stupid things that are angering both the resistance and the Shia and the population as a whole here in Lebanon, and at the same time angering the only country that is delivering, aid to Lebanon at no cost, which is Iraq. So you almost wonder if the prime minister of Lebanon did this, said these derogatory statements against the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Units in order to actually have the oil cut, because his American and Zionist and Gulf masters want Lebanon to even feel more weak and more desperate, so it can accept the demands of these countries.
So when we were last in South Lebanon together, Laith, in late February, after the funeral of Syed Hassan Nasrallah, we went to Kafar Akila and we saw a village that had been essentially leveled to the ground. And of course, this has been repeated in other border villages in South Lebanon. Since I last saw you in South Lebanon, has there been any meaningful reconstruction that has taken place in these border villages? Have the residents of these villages been able to return, other than just for a brief visit, and actually begin to rebuild their lives?
Yeah, I mean, we've been visiting a lot of these villages over the last week. And for instance, as I said yesterday, we were in Al Khiyam, and clearly residents removed some of these destroyed buildings. There's a lot of still, of course, rubble around. And any home that was salvageable, we saw residents, as we were there, either fixing them up or already back in them, and they've been fixed up. We also saw the same in Yarun. We saw the same in Kafarkila, where some of the homes have been that were up the hill, that were not totally destroyed, fixed up. The ones, of course, inside Kafarkila, everything is destroyed. But we saw also the charitable organization Wata'awanu has been bringing these mobile homes to create kind of shopping places with a bakery and or grocery and corner store kind of situation for people that have come back to have the basics available to them. Say we in Yarun, we saw people have fixed up a lot of the village, for instance. Other places, it's clearly slower because the destruction is much larger. But Hezbollah has given almost $500 million to the residents in the south that had their properties destroyed or damaged. And this is with the blockade. This is with the destruction of Hezbollah's, or banking organizations or affiliated organizations, like, let's say, Al-Qard al-Hassan, the good loan, and or the blocking of direct flights from Tehran because these Americans were worried about money coming to the country for the reconstruction. Even with all these limitations, Hezbollah has been able to give out $500 million for the reconstruction efforts, and we're seeing already the effects of that. The roads have been cleared. Anything that is salvageable already is being patched up. And in places where there's no services, we see these mobile homes being brought in. And that's much more than any of the Zionists can approve of. And that's why we see over the last 2 weeks, and specifically in the last week, multiple attacks on these mobile homes, and destruction of these mobile bakeries and so forth, and re-beginning of the use of jets, not only drones, targeting homes and farms. That's all because the Zionists are really pissed that the residents are returning in full force.
Right. And lastly, Laith, I'd like to return to the ground zero of the genocide, and that of course is the Gaza Strip. And I'd like to show you a clip from the recent 90-minute interview that Steve Witkoff, Trump's personal emissary, his special envoy to the region, his interview with Tucker Carlson, where he talked about his visit to Gaza. So let's listen in what he had to say.
I shook hands with everybody I met because who doesn't want to shake the hand of these guys around the field? They protect our country. I'm talking about our military guys. And then they showed me, this is Southern Command of Israel, then showed me a film of what happened on October 7th.
Yep.
And the film is horrific.
Yes.
It is about mass rapes.
Yep.
There's pictures of Hamas people cutting the head off of an Israeli soldier. I watched them saw the head off. I mean, it's really terrible stuff, and it's beyond what I've ever seen. And it can taint you, right? It can taint the way you're going to, feel about these people. And I think sometimes as a negotiator, you have to be dispassionate.
Yes.
It's not easy to make decisions if you're going to. But I had to see that film, Tucker. I mean, that film is a reality. I mean, we can't ignore the reality of what happened on October 7th.
Right.
Now, they would tell you that they've got justification, but there's no justification for what happened that day. There just isn't. And unfortunately, there were security lapses that day that shouldn't have happened, that accentuated what happened that day,
Yes.
which shouldn't have happened. But
do we understand that?
I think we understand that there were security lapses,
sure.
that there were some mistakes that were made.
Yes.
But we're humans. We're not robots,
Oh, I
right?
agree.
We're not we're not completely overwhelmed by AI right now. So people will make mistakes. There were intelligence mistakes, but there's some really good people who were involved here. I met some exceptional people in Israel. I mean, really some exceptional people who.
Yes.
And it's a difficult situation, but I think you have to know what Hamas wants. Just to go back to your question.
Yes.
And then you've got to figure out what you can give them that allows them to walk out. Because that's what's needed here. You know, what we heard in the beginning of this conflict is Hamas is ideological, they're prepared to die. For a whole variety of reasons, I personally, and I talked to the president about this, there's nothing I don't talk to the president about before we're going to make a decision.
Yes.
Because he is the guy.
Yes.
He was elected, I was not, none of the other people were, he was elected. And I think that's how we have to function. With that said, I said to him, I don't think that they are as ideologically locked in. They're not ideologically intractable. I never believe that, by the way.
So, Laith, where does one begin with this spiel? I don't know if we caught it at the beginning there, but earlier in the interview, it might have been part of this clip. He says he went to Gaza and he saw it was completely demolished. And immediately, right out of his mouth after he says that, and then I had a fabulous lunch with CENTCOM. This is a man who went to a place where people are being starved to death, where they've been subjected to genocide for 18 months, and he's raving about the fabulous lunch that he had with CENTCOM. And then he tells us about this propaganda exercise he had to go through. He had to see this. He repeats a lot of the nonsense that the Israelis have been regurgitating. Throughout this interview, Tucker Carlson was one of the most sycophantic interviews I've ever seen Tucker Carlson give. He literally was talking to Witkoff like the sun shines out of his derriere. Oh, you're such an amazing diplomat. You try so hard to understand other people. You really need to know where they're coming from. And there was no hint in any of that, that this man has any empathy for Palestinians whatsoever. And the overall impression I have after this, and this is just a glimpse into what in the mindset of this man, who is Trump's, voice and ears in the region, that there is no prospect whatsoever of the Trump administration coming to the aid of the Palestinian people at this stage. They are going all in on this genocide, and the only thing these people understand is force. And the only way to save the Palestinian people, it seems to me, and I'm sad to say this because I always prefer the peaceful solution, is armed resistance. So, I mean, that's what I see here. And and just to conclude my tirade, I've said this before in a conversation with you. This man bears an uncanny similarity to Blinken. He's soft-spoken. He's got the baby face. He's impeccably coiffed, beautifully attired. Peace, peace, peace. That's all you heard coming out of his mouth. And the whole while, the country he represents is behaving in the most savage Nazi-like manner imaginable in the region that he has been sent to save from war. So I'm sorry, I had to get all of that off my chest. What is your impression of this Witkoff character? Is there any prospect whatsoever of the Trump administration showing the slightest bit of empathy for the Palestinian people at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think ever the Trump administration would side with Palestinians and or limit the Zionist goals and actions in terms of the genocide that's happening. And of course, Witkoff talking about that famous video that nobody else have seen other than officials in the West, but we're all not allowed to see. I mean, it's been now 17 months that all of this has been debunked. There's no evidence of any rapes and or mass killings done by the Palestinian resistance on October 7th. The Israelis have released every possible video of violence against Palestinians and Palestinian prisoners and rape of Palestinian prisoners. And if there was an ounce, a gram, a milligram of evidence of any of these accusations against the Palestinians, we would have already seen it. I mean, come on, though the Zionists that created the Holocaust industry and the Holocaust movie industry would have ran this into huge, rollouts in all the cinemas if there was anything for us to see. I don't see the United States backing down from supporting this genocide, except if there is a revolution happening in the United States. And this is the same truth for all the Western countries. The political class in Canada, the Canadian elections are coming, and I'm sure you're talking about this in your shows. I think I saw one of your other segments talking with fellow Canadians about the upcoming elections there. That shows you also, again, Canada, there's no hope of change on this file without a revolution. And given that the Jewish populations in Canada and the United States and the West, and the plight of Jewish people has been used as the excuse for the genocide of the Palestinians, our fellow anti-Zionist Jews have a responsibility, if they want to save whatever is left of credibility of the Jewish faith, to take action and to be at the leadership of a revolutionary action. We're not talking about demonstrations and or writing petitions to parliament. We're talking about the anti-Zionist Jews returning to revolutionary days of the Bund and the anarchist circles, and targeting their Zionist leadership amongst them that abuses their name to support this genocide. We're also talking about the responsibility of American citizens at large, or Canadian citizens at large, their tax money is funding this genocide and the weapons that are coming to this country to do something. So I don't want to make it look like I'm targeting our anti-Zionist Jewish friends, because all Western citizens right now that are living under these fascist regimes that are involved in this genocide have a duty to be revolutionary and to take action, concrete action, and not just demonstrations and letters and public social media posts.
They are indeed fascist regimes. I mean, what could be more fascist than supporting a genocide being conducted in the most audacious, in your face, fuck you manner imaginable, which is what we've been witnessing for 18 months. And the last thing I want to ask you about our comrades in Gaza is that, the resistance channels on Telegram have been reporting a resumption of armed combat. And I've seen reports about the full array of, tactics and weapons at the disposal of the resistance in Gaza. They are using mortars, Yasin shells being fired at armored vehicles, tanks. They are sending whatever missiles they can into settlements in occupied Palestine. People being sniped. These are the claims that are coming out from the Telegram channels of the resistance. You see precious little about this in the Western and Israeli media. I mean, the only reports, the only thing they're acknowledging are the missiles that are coming into occupied Palestine, because they can't hide those. Those do have an impact, and they are heard, and the sirens go off and so forth. But very little being said about the combat within Gaza itself. So, Laith, what is your understanding of the state of the armed resistance within Gaza, and particularly over the past 3 to 4 weeks?
Yeah, and we definitely saw the return to kind of full confrontations. There was an incident yesterday in the south of Gaza, in an area that the Israelis have occupied and destroyed everything in. In fact, the Israelis just a few days before had released a video of them destroying a tunnel in that area. And what we saw is resistance coming out from under the ground from that same tunnel that supposedly was blown up, and firing these anti-tank shells, the Yasin shells, on multiple tanks and armored vehicles. And the Israelis have acknowledged at least 2 soldiers dead over the last 24 hours from that incident. We also heard about the Israeli army having to reckon with 100,000 soldiers refusing to show up for their service. That's a huge number. That's a huge number. And because of this 100,000 soldiers disappearing, running away from the country, refusing to appear for their service, calling, we saw also the Israeli media talk about new cadets that haven't finished their training being thrown into the front line in Gaza. And those are all indications of the fatigue within the Israeli military that has never fought any war that is longer than 2 months. So we're right now seeing the physical fatigue of the military. And I tell you, of course, this is something that everybody knows, that if Israel didn't have the supply of weapons non-stop coming from the West, it would have lost this war long time ago. Okay, so now this is why it's critical now for the Israelis to have the United States start a bigger war with Yemen and or Iran, because they need the battle to move to a different ground in the region. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how much weapons the United States throws on the Zionist colony. Right now, the Zionists need an infusion of new blood and or fighters, and the majority of the militias and mercenaries that the United States controls around the world are engaged in other battle zones. They're too busy. They've sucked up as many of them as possible into Gaza over the last 17 months, but now you have Syria needing all these militias to be moved to them, as we see, to control it. So the Israelis are desperate, and the resistance, of course, is doing all it can, given these conditions and the continuation of the genocide and starvation of Gaza.
Mhm. Yeah, I saw a report, just to conclude, in the Israeli media that the military brass had decided to limit combat operations in Gaza in order to create the conditions for a hostage deal. I almost fell off my chair in uproarious laughter. I mean, they're grasping at any straws to explain their incapacity to mount a serious offensive across the strip at this stage. Losing 100,000 men will do that to an army. In any event, Laith, why don't you tell us again where people can find the excellent reports of Free Palestine TV and how they can donate?
Yes, you can go to our website, freepalestine.video. You can subscribe for a monthly donation or throw a one-time donation if you'd like. And from there, you can follow all our socials or on YouTube, X, and so forth. There's a report we're just coming out with today in the honor, of course, of Easter. We went to Cana of Galilee, where Prophet Jesus performed his first miracle and turned water into wine, and where we report about the destruction in Cana and, of course, the celebrations of Easter in the churches of Cana. So please go visit our website and watch this report on the social media networks.
I will indeed. It's Easter Monday here in Greece, and we wish our best to all of our Orthodox brothers and sisters, wherever they may be. Thank you very much, Laith. And this is Dimitri Lascaris signing off from Kalamata on April 18th, 2025.